Good evening, everyone. I, Aditya, welcome you all over here. In today's lecture, we welcome Professor Rudrangshu Mukherjee, an eminent historian of colonial India and Chancellor of Ashoka University. Bringing 4 decades of minute research, Professor Mukherjee has an incredible way of bringing forward intricacies in multiple motivations, regional dynamics, and human experiences behind the first wave of India's anti colonial resistance. Drawing from subaltern perspective and revisionist spirit, reflects his earnest commitment towards understanding India's past from below and of marginalized through profound analysis of archival sources, focusing on the voices of marginalized peasants, sepoys, and local leaders whose actions had determined the course of the rebellion. He highlights pragmatic decisions, shifting allegiances, and regional variations, which are contrary to conventional portrayal of the revolt as a monolithic struggle. His analysis also reflects the brutal suppression by the colonial state, giving a stark reflection on the cost of rebellion and the resilience of resistance. With his complex but clear argumentation, enriched by vivid anecdotes from varied sources, Professor Mukherjee brings to life the human dimensions of the revolt. Sir has authored several books, including Awadh Revolt, 1857-58, a study of popular resistance, Spectre of Violence, the 1857 Kanpur Massacre, Mangal Pandey, Brave Martyr or Accidental Hero, and others. He has also authored and edited several other books on different themes, including The Penguin Gandhi Reader, Trade and Politics, and the Indian Ocean World, Essays in honor of Ashwin Das Gupta, Remembered Childhood, Essays in honor of Andre Betil, New Delhi, The Making of a Capital and Great Speeches of Modern India. His latest book is Nehru and Bose. This lecture promises to be a profound exploration of the enduring legacy of 1857, inviting the audience to rethink history through a fresh and a critical lens. Over to you, sir.
Thank you. Thank you for this opportunity to speak to all of you and for that introduction. Uh, just one word of addition. That book on Nehru and Bose came out in 2014. I have written other books after that. Maybe you could inform your readers about those books, including another book on 1857, which is called The Begum and the Rani, Hazrat Mahal and Lakshmi Bai in 1857. So I have been asked to speak on the role of the peasantry in the rebellion in Awadh. So that is my focus. I'm not talking about other regions of North India. Though if there is a Q&A, if there are any questions, I'm willing to take them, provided I know the answers to them, because my focus has always been on Awadh. So I'll be largely be concentrating on Awadh itself. But I'm not beginning with Awadh, because you cannot understand what happened in Awadh in 1857 without going out of Awadh, in fact. As probably all of you know, the rebellion began on the 10th of May, in the evening of the 10th of May, 1857 in Meerut, where the sepoys took to arms, killed every single European they could, white man, Firangi, they could lay their hands on, and destroyed a lot of Sarkari property. And then 75 of them rode away to Delhi as darkness descended, after having cut the telegraph wire that connected Meerut to Delhi. These people arrived in Delhi at the dawn of 11th of May. And following their arrival, I'm not going into details, the sepoys of Delhi, this is 11th of May, sepoys of Delhi also rose in rebellion. And by the 12th of May, Delhi had fallen out of the control of the British. And Bahadur Shah, the Mughal emperor who lived in the Lal Killa, had declared himself to be the leader of this Gadar, this rebellion that had been started in Meerut. So having the Mughal emperor as the leader gave this rebellion uprising a kind of legitimacy. But what is very significant is that 10th, 11th, 12th, these are the 3 days I have mentioned. From the 12th to the 14th, nothing happened in North India. North India was quiet. Then the news that Delhi had fallen to the rebels, Delhi was no longer under the control of the British. This news traveled down the Gangetic Valley to Aligarh. So it took about 1.5 days to 2 days to travel to Aligarh. Then the cantonment, the sepoys in Aligarh rose in rebellion. The news of the Aligarh uprising took 1 day to travel, 1 night to travel to Bulandshahr, where Bulandshahr sepoys rose in rebellion. The news of the uprising in Bulandshahr took 1 night to travel to Etawah. The sepoys of Etawah took to arms and defied the British. So what I'm trying to point out is the transmission of the news of the uprising and the fall of Delhi. If you plot on 2 axes the dates of the uprisings in the various cantonments of North India, the dates on one axis and the names of the cantonments on another axis, then you will find that exactly the time taken for the news to travel from one cantonment to another cantonment and is the time for the next cantonment to rise in rebellion. So it is the transmission of the news that is leading to the uprisings in the cantonment. There's a transmission of news that is taking place, transmission of that Delhi has fallen, that Bahadur Shah has become the leader of the uprising, and there is now an uprising in progress. Through this process of transmission, by the 30th of May, the news reaches Lucknow, which is the capital of Awadh. And the Lucknow garrison, the sepoys of Lucknow, rise in rebellion. So the news of these uprisings was not just being transmitted to the sepoys, the news of these uprisings were also being transmitted to the British authorities. So Henry Lawrence, who was the resident in Lucknow, what he had done 2 or 3 days previous to 30th of May was he had brought in all the Firangi, the white people, into the residency to avoid them being killed by the sepoys. And once the uprising started in Lucknow, the sepoys all gathered. I'm still using the word sepoys, but I will have to change it in 1 minute. all gathered around the residency, and the battle to take over the residency began in earnest by the beginning of June. No, I said I'm still using the word sepoy. From Meerut, from the very initial moment of this uprising, once the sepoys began the uprising, initiated the uprising, non-military elements, that is to say the civil population of the towns as well as the surrounding villages, joined the sepoys in carrying out acts of defiance, acts of destruction, acts of killing. This happened in every single cantonment town across North India, beginning with Meerut right down to Patna and westwards right down to Jhansi. So there was A, transmission, B, a fusion that was taking place in the nature of the uprising between the military, sepoys, and the common people, the peasants, artisans, the civil population, who poured into these cantonments to support their sepoy comrades. So the distinction between a mutiny and a rebellion and uprising became quickly blurred. It began as a mutiny, and almost simultaneously it became an uprising. This is a very, very important phenomena that needs to be noted. Now, the question to ask inevitably is, why did this happen? Why did this fusion take place between the sepoy elements and the non-sepoy elements, between the sepoy elements and the peasantry, artisans, common people of these urban settlements, cantonments, as well as the surrounding villages? The answer is, the sepoys, even though they were in uniform and they had been trained to be soldiers, if you look at their background, if you look at from where they were recruited, you will find that all of them came from peasant agricultural backgrounds. So therefore, the sepoys are often described, I myself have used this phrase, are often described as peasants in uniform. These were people who had been recruited into the Bengal army in North India and then had been from agricultural peasant background and then had been trained to be soldiers. But they retained their links with the villages from where they came. So whenever they were on leave, they would actually go back to their villages and become peasants again till their vacation or their holidays finished and they came back to the cantonment to become soldiers again. So there was this give and take, if you like, between the rural world and the sepoy lines in the cantonments. Therefore, the fusion was facilitated because the peasants saw that their sepoy brethren, who were also peasants, were actually defying the British, and they joined in that uprising. There were multiple reasons for this joining and the nature of the uprising, which we will come to later. In the case of Awadh, this fact of the background of the sepoys from where they were recruited is particularly important because whatever data we have of the recruitment, pre-1858 data of the recruitment of sepoys is not very abundant. It is in fact very scarce. But whatever data we have, whatever data we have shows that more than 85% or 85% of the sepoys of the Bengal army actually came from one particular area of Awadh, the southeastern part of Awadh. If you look at the map today, these are the districts of Sultanpur, Pratapgarh, Rae Bareli, Faizabad. This kind of area was the recruiting ground for the sepoys of the Bengal army. So, therefore, these sepoys had a special affinity to what was going on in Awadh, what was happening to Awadh under British rule. This is a point that I will elaborate in towards the end of my talk. So, in the month of June, the Lucknow is up in arms against the British. And as Lucknow is up in arms, just as what had happened from Delhi, now the news of the Lucknow uprising is transmitted into the districts of Awadh. Sitapur, Hardoi, Faizabad, so on. All the surrounding districts that made up the kingdom of Awadh. The news that the Lucknow garrison had mutinied and that the British were completely on the back foot, surrounded in the residency, reached the districts. And then the districts also took to arms, defied the representatives of British administration in the districts. And not only that, many of these peasants from the districts and sepoys from the districts also rushed into Lucknow. So we find in June, July, and a real increase in the number of people who are engaged in fighting the British in Lucknow. And this population, rebel population, register a significant victory against the British in the Battle of Chinhat towards the end of June. It is now clear that the British are in no position to actually overwhelm the rebel population of Lucknow. They are well and truly completely surrounded in the residency. And this moment of, well, triumph is too strong a word, this moment of victory after Chinhat is celebrated in Lucknow in many different ways, but the most significant way in which it was celebrated was by the coronation of a king. Birjis Qadar, the son of Wajid Ali Shah, 10 or 11 years old, was made the king by the rebels. This is very important. The rebels are actually choosing who is to be a king. So the peasants, sepoys who are peasants in uniform, these are the people who are deciding who is going to be the king. The king is not the decision maker. The rebels are the decision maker. Just like in Delhi, it's the peasants who told Bahadur Shah that you must be our leader. It's only when the peasants made such a demand, it was not even a request, it was a demand, that Bahadur Shah declared himself to be a leader. So I want to emphasize this shift in agency. The agency is no longer with the royalty, with the king. The agency is now with the rebels. So the most significant aspect of this celebration of victory, and in fact it was announced all over Lucknow, that the Firangi Raj is gone. It's a thing of the past. There were proclamations, placards that were put out, processions that were taken out, sweets that were distributed, feasting occurred in certain parts of Lucknow, all to celebrate that the Firangi Raj was over. And the rebels now had their own king in British Qadar. So this is one very important feature of the uprising in Awadh. And British Qadar, of course, is only 10, 11 years old, as I said. So the real power behind the throne is his mother, Begum Hazrat Mahal, who appoints ministers, carefully distributing responsibility. And two different councils are created by Hazrat Mahal. One is a council that will carry out the continuing war against the British to ensure that the residency is taken. The British can no longer remain in the residency, take over the residency. And the other is to set up an administration so that this war can be supplied with food, with ammunition, and so on. Law and order can be preserved so that chaos doesn't reign in Lucknow. Carefully divided two different councils with separate responsibilities. And in both these councils, there are sepoy representatives. So it is not just the old administrative personnel of the Nawabi administration that are running these ministries or manning these ministries. There are sepoys also who are representing the voice of the people, if you like, the interests and the voices of the people. So the war against the British, who are now within the residency, completely surrounded, being shelled all the time, continues from June, July, right up to August, September. Now, when British historians write the history of the rebellion, or as they still call it, the history of the mutiny in Awadh, they concentrate on the suffering, the bravery, and the heroism of the British men and women who were within the residency and constantly under attack. That is their focus. In my work on Awadh, I shifted the focus. I wasn't concerned with what the British were undergoing, what the British were suffering. I was trying to find out what the rebels were doing. Okay. And then once I posed this question, I came out with some startling answers. The first answer was the number of people. At any given point of time between July to September, there were close to 200,000 people who were actually fighting and trying to take over the residency in Lucknow. This is not a small number by any reckoning. And we also find that this administrative setup that I spoke about is actually setting up supply chains to get ammunition, to get gunpowder, and so on. So this is a really concentrated effort that is taking place. And large numbers of people are involved in this effort, very large numbers of people, and they are the common people of Awadh. Absolutely common people. As I said, peasants, artisans, shopkeepers, and so on. The British, of course, are not sitting quiet watching all this happening. They have sent up an army from Calcutta, which comes by train to Allahabad and then marches from Allahabad to Kanpur, and then from Kanpur it marches to Lucknow. This is led by Havelock and Outram. They march from Kanpur, trying to get to Lucknow, which they finally do in September, October. But they have to fight every inch of the way. There are vivid descriptions left by British soldiers of how, in a district like Unnao, which is just south of Lucknow, they had to get into hand-to-hand combat with the common people of Unnao, where they were being fired at, stones being hurled at them, people coming out on the streets with swords in every single village and small town of Unnao. So through this attack, loss of lives, they reach Lucknow and they get into the residency. Now the problem is that they get into the residency expecting that they would rescue the people who are within the residency. But they find that they cannot get out of the residency because the residency is completely encircled. And the number of people, as I said, was close to 200,000. But by October, September, October, the number has in fact increased. Figures show it is somewhere around 300,000 people who are fighting in Lucknow to take over the residency. So they can't come out. So the British like to call it the relief of the residency. Actually, there wasn't a relief because they got into the residency, but they couldn't come out of the residency. So the siege of the residency continues. It continues till November, till a second army under Sir Colin Campbell, who was later to become Lord Clyde, enters Lucknow with an even bigger army than Havelock and Outram. And this is the real relief of Lucknow. This is where they enter the residency, defeating the people who had been fighting, the rebels who had been fighting outside the residency to gain access to the residency. Campbell defeats them. Campbell and his troops defeat them, enter the residency, and take out the British population, the white population from the residency, and bring them back to Allahabad. Now, once this happens, Campbell is victorious in gaining the residency. A reverse process begins. The first process was what? People came from the districts into Lucknow to fight. Now, rebels who had concentrated their efforts in Lucknow disperse to go back to the districts. And they do so under the leadership of Hazrat Mahal, who also leaves Lucknow towards the end of November. So the fighting against the British is no longer concentrated in Lucknow, but is concentrated in the various districts of Awadh. So Campbell again has to proceed from Allahabad, sending out batches of troops into the districts of Awadh. So this is north of the Grand Trunk Road, into the districts of Awadh to defeat all these various rebel forces. And they're of considerable size, and they are no longer fighting pitched battles. They are fighting what in modern terminology is called a guerrilla warfare. It's largely hit and run. And these forces, these guerrilla forces, often acting under the directions, written directions of Begum Hazrat Mahal and her entourage, that the British have to fight. And the fighting goes on right through the winter of 1857, right into March, April 1858. It is often said that the rebellion of 1857 lasted only through the summer of 1857. In the case of Awadh, this is explicitly not the case. The rebellion in Awadh is not actually fully suppressed, fully defeated till March, April 1858. So it's nearly 1 year, if you take it nearly, few months short of 1 year. If you take it from 30th May and bring it to March, then it's nearly few months short of 1 year. That's how long the rebellion lasts in Awadh. And it has to be, as I said, it has to be suppressed through many innumerable military encounters. So the next question that we have to ask, now having established that the rebellion in Awadh had a very strong popular base, the question that needs to be answered is why? Why did this rebellion acquire this popular base? There are a number of reasons for this. The most important reason is the impact that the coming of British rule had on the people of Awadh. This impact has at least two dimensions to it. One is an emotional / sentimental dimension, and the other is an economic dimension. Let me try and elaborate both these two dimensions. What do I mean when I say an emotional, sentimental dimension? This is the way Wajid Ali Shah, the king of Awadh, was treated. The fact that the British broke an existing treaty and deposed Wajid Ali Shah and sent him away on exile to Calcutta. This had an impact on the people of Awadh. When Wajid Ali Shah left Lucknow, contemporary accounts say that 7,000 to 10,000 people walked behind Wajid Ali Shah as he went from Lucknow to Kanpur to board a steamer that would take him to Allahabad, and then he would go on by train to Calcutta. And not only did they walk with Wajid Ali Shah, they were singing Wajid Ali Shah's songs. So the emotional tie, the bond between Jane Alam, as Wajid Ali Shah was known, and the people of Awadh is very clear. They were singing his songs. And Wajid Ali Shah, in his own way, was a very popular king because he was never out of touch with the people, the ceremonies, the rituals, the festivals that the people performed. The British, of course, thought he was an incompetent king, because why would a king dance? Why would a king write songs? Why would a king fly kites? From the British perspective, this was not the job, or this is not how a king should behave. But from Wajid Ali Shah's, from the perspective of the Indian notion of kingship, this is an attempt. These were all attempts on the part of Wajid Ali Shah to remain in touch with the people. So that this was the emotion. They felt that Wajid Ali Shah had been betrayed. Wajid Ali Shah had been very badly treated. Okay. Our king has been taken away from us. That was the emotional disruption that had taken place. The economic disruption was the imposition of the British land revenue settlement in 1856, was what the British called the summary settlement of Awadh in 1856. In this summary settlement, there are two aspects of this summary settlement that needs to be highlighted. One, the taluqdars, very old landholders of Awadh, sometimes holding land for over 5-6 generations. Their holdings were halved by the summary settlement. In certain cases, in certain districts, it was more than half. So that created a resentment among taluqdars, who were very powerful people. They had their own forts, they had their own cannons, they had their own retainers, armed retainers. The forts were all taken away from them. So the dispossession of the taluqdars is one phenomenon. The second was the land revenue demand was also increased. How much a peasant would have to pay as land revenue was increased in every single district. In certain districts, it was increased to an enormous extent. So this also created discontent among the cultivators, among the ryots. Third is the British began their administration by introducing British laws and British legal systems. This was completely alien to the population of Awadh. One folk song of that era, 1856, put it very poignantly. It says, the Company Bahadur, I'm translating, the Company Bahadur came and began to measure the land in iron chains. Iron chains, very important phrase. In other words, British administration had no flexibility. It was completely streamlined. And the riots, used to a certain amount of flexibility, found that they had lost that old world. And now everything was streamlined. And if you didn't pay your land revenue on time to the paisa, you lost your land. As one peasant told a collector, British collector, we do not understand your Ain and Kanun. It is completely alien to us. So these were some of the grounds of resentment among the rural elite, taluqdars, and the ryots, the cultivator of the soil. So both sections of the population, rural population, had reasons to be resentful of the arrival of the British and British administration. And add to this the sentimental, emotional dimension that I have already spoken about. Now, the other thing to remember here is the relationship between the taluqdars and the peasants. Of course, a major feature of this relationship was one of exploitation. Taluqdars were, after all, land revenue collectors. But this feature of exploitation, undeniable, let's not underestimate that, was also laced by a very strong element of patronage. The taluqdars were often seen by the peasants as being their protectors, our rakhwars, one peasant said. And now suddenly the British had removed this layer of protection. The peasants felt that they had no patrons anymore, felt exposed. Now, I want to warn you about something. Often, this, what I think is an irrelevant question, is posed. So, was the British administration better or worse than the King's administration, the arrangements that the taluqdars had? It's not a question of which was better or which was worse. The question is one of familiarity. What did the peasants find themselves to be comfortable with? It was a familiar world that was disappearing at one stroke with the coming and the imposition of British rule. This is what was being resented, the passing of a familiar world. And as I said, across the spectrum of the rural population, this resentment existed. So when the peasants joined their sepoys brethren, who, as I've already said, were originally sepoys, in rebellion, sometimes they found that they had an ally in the taluqdar, who, for his own different reasons, was also angry at British rule and was fighting the British. So the taluqdars, with their retainers, with their peasants, actually moved into Lucknow in the summer of 1857, once the uprising had begun in Lucknow. And then, after Campbell's recovery of Lucknow, these taluqdars returned to their districts, again with their retainers, with their peasantry. The situation was very well articulated by the taluqdar of Kalakankar. His name was Hanwant Singh. And Hanwant Singh had rescued the collector of Rae Bareli, a man called Barrow. Barrow lived in Rae Bareli as the collector. He had a wife and a small baby. And when the rebellion broke out in Rae Bareli and all the Europeans were being killed, Barrow with his family came to Hanwant Singh for protection. Hanwant Singh gave him protection. And at an opportune moment, few weeks later, he gave Barrow a boat, some of his armed retainers to give him protection, and said, "You can now go, take the river and go to Allahabad." Before he embarked for Allahabad, Barrow asked Hanwant Singh, "So what are you going to do now?" And this is what Hanuman Singh said. I am roughly paraphrasing what Hanuman Singh said. And Barrow wrote it down immediately after he heard Hanuman Singh's speech. He wrote it down. So we have Barrow's evidence on this. This is what Hanuman Singh said. He said, Sahib, you came to my country and removed our king. You took away from me land that had belonged to my family for more than 5 generations. Then the people of the land rose against you, and you came to me for protection. My honor dictated that I give you protection because you had come to me as a helpless guest. Now that you are going, I will march to Lucknow at the head of my peasants and fight the Firangi, you, in Lucknow, to throw you out of Hindustan. So look at the various elements of this speech, if you like, that Hanuman Singh made to Barrow. People of the land rose against you. You threw away our king. You took my land. And now I am going to fight you at the head of my peasantry. So this relationship, this kind of bond that existed between the taluqdar and the peasant is also being emphasized. And this is what explains the large gathering of rural population in Lucknow to fight the British. And then again, the guerrilla warfare that takes place in the winter of 1857-58 in the various districts of Awadh. These are all Talukdar-led military encounters. But the base of that rebellion is the peasantry, the common people of Awadh. The available calculation is that 2/3 of the adult male population of Awadh, we don't know the exact figures, but 2/3 of the adult male population of Awadh actually took part in the rebellion of Awadh in the 9 months of the rebellion between 1857 and 58. The last point I want to make is, what is it that made? Was it just the sentimental reasons? Was it just the economic disaffection that made the people, not just in Awadh, but elsewhere in North India as well, take arms against the British, kill the British, destroy their property, and so on? Because it is a fact that for nearly 6 months, beginning from May to around November, December, British rule in North India had ceased to exist. As one British officer was later to write, British rule collapsed in North India like a house of cards. So what was the reason for this massive upsurge? There was the very common and prevalent perception among the common people, the princes, the landholding population like the taluqdars, that British rule was trying to destroy something that was very cherished and very valuable to the people of North India. That was their dharma. Now, I want to pause a little bit. This word dharma is very loosely translated as religion into English as religion. This is an inadequate translation. We have no word for it, but it is an inadequate translation. We should be fully aware of this. The word dharma is not just religion. Religion is a part of dharma, but it's not just religion. The word dharma is derived from dharan, something that holds together, a receptacle that holds together. It is a cementing tie that holds society together, of which religion is a part. It's a way of life, if you like. And large sections of the population of North India were convinced that the British were trying to destroy this dharma and impose a completely alien way of life on the people of North India. And they fought to restore their dharma. A group of peasants who were caught by the British in December 1858 on the border of Nepal and Awadh. They all knew that they were going to be killed, executed as rebels. But each one of them was separately asked, why did you do this? Why did you rebel? And each one of them in different words said, our dharma was under attack. We fought to defend our dharma. If a man's dharma goes, what is there to live for? This highlights this perception that dharma was under, a way of life was under attack, under threat, and people fought to defend that. There's a second layer I want to add, and this is what I will leave you with. Many of the rebel leaders issued ishtihars, proclamations, in which they elaborated what this fight was about. Each of these ishtihars talk about this attack on dharma, and they appeal to Hindus and Muslims. Our dharma and our din are under attack. So it is the moral duty of Hindus and Muslims to defend their dharma and their din. There is no religious sectarianism at work here. The appeal is not to just one religious community or sect. It is to all the people. And there are many examples of this kind of religious fraternization. For example, I'm moving a little out of Awadh. In Bareilly, the British spent 50,000 rupees, a lot of money those days, 1857. This is October 1857, spent 50,000 rupees to instigate the Hindu population of Farrukhabad to rise against the Muslim Nawab of Farrukhabad. They failed. Nothing happened. This money was wasted. They were not willing to rise against the Nawab of Farrukhabad, the Hindu population. And for me, the most poignant example of this fraternization, and in many ways the most poignant moment of 1857, when Birchis Qadar was put on the throne of Awadh by the rebels. They danced, once having put him on the throne, they danced around the throne. Sepoys most of them Hindus, if not all of them Hindus. And you know what they were saying when they danced? When they danced, they said, pointing to British colors, they said, "You are our Kanhaiya. You are our Krishna." Kanhaiya, Krishna, all of you know the connotation of Kanhaiya. So Hindu sepoys celebrating a Muslim prince as Krishna. That is the level of the religious fraternization, the absence of religious sectarianism that was represented and articulated in the rebellion of 1857. Thank you very much.
Yeah. Am I audible?
Yeah.
Yeah. Thank you very much, sir, for this enlightening lecture where you discussed about Awadh and how it led to the revolt. Further, if you allow, we can take few questions.
Yeah.
Okay. So through chat box, I have received 3 questions. First question is related to the ideological dispute between subaltern and nationalist view. Strengthens the imperialist school of thought. So the person wants to ask that the ideological drift between the subaltern and nationalist views as part of the revolt of 1857. So this dispute led to the growth of the imperialist school of thought.
So what is the question?
Let me read it out. So the question is, can we say that the ideological dispute between subaltern and nationalist view historians give strength to imperialist school of thought?
Did what? What's the last? Imperialist?
Did give strength
The
to the
dispute
imperialist school?
did lead to what?
The dispute lead to just a minute. The person wants to ask that the dispute between the nationalist and the subaltern school
Yeah.
led to the strength of the imperialist school of thought.
Not at all, because neither of these two schools were supporting imperialism in any way. What subaltern historians were trying to do was to shift the focus. Their argument was that mainstream nationalist historiography, the mainstream history of Indian nationalism as written by nationalist historians, had laid too much emphasis on the role of leaders. Gandhi, Nehru, Patel, Bose, whoever. And they were saying, yes, but there were common people also. Subalterns is the shorthand for common people, peasants, artisans, and so on and so forth, who were also fighting their own battles against imperialism. We need also to concentrate on or bring out their battles and what kind of battles were they fighting, why were they fighting, so on and so forth. So it certainly did not lead to the strengthening of imperialist history writing. It in fact led completely to the opposite, in the opposite direction.
Okay. The second question is psychological motivations of peasants who participated in the revolt. So the speaker wants to know that whether anger, fear, or frustration helped the peasants to rise and rebel against the Britishers.
It was not frustration, it was genuine grievance. And the ideology was that you are trying to take away from us something that we cherish. And we want to restore that. By throwing it out, we want to restore that. That's the ideological motivation.
And the third question is inabilities of the British administration that led to the revolt of 1857.
What of the British
Inabilities
administration?
Inabilities or weak points. Just a minute.
Not inabilities, I would say misdeeds of British administration.
Yeah.
The fact that they were completely insensitive of the views, the interests of the Indian people. They were here not to serve the interests of India and the Indian people. They were here to serve. The British administrators were here to serve the interests of the British government, the British economy, the British society. It is this insensitivity that led to the uprising.
Yeah. So one question from my side. As you talked about that the taluqdars were the patrons of the peasants. So when taluqdars were means their power and economic position was reduced by the British. So peasant felt that they are losing their patronage. You know, it is very popular in northern India, the my bap relation between
Yes.
the taluqdar and the peasants. So I
Yeah.
want to know, as some historians argue that this is like peasants don't have their own mind to think, or they're not acting on their own. They are being motivated by their relation between the taluqdars and the peasants.
But no, I think you're misreading it. They're making a choice.
Okay.
A choice involves a mind. Otherwise, how do you make a choice?
Yeah. Okay. Thank you. So thank you so much, sir, for this enlightening lecture. And we're really grateful that you accepted our invitation for this lecture. Thank you.
Thank you so much.